I am the External Affairs Director for the Food Trust, and I wear a lot of different hats. I'm really fortunate that I have a job that gives me that kind of flexibility. So it's not only working on health policy and equity issues around the country, but locally, I get to work with our Food Policy Council and help advance health areas with them, on the Mayor's Commission for African American Males, and again, looking for that intersection between all the things that are impacting Black men in this city. I'm a trustee of a foundation, but also get to sit on the Regional Association Board of Philanthropy Network, where I get to influence funders to think about how they do their work differently and how to really shift power back to community. So all these things really make up kind of who I am, and I feel really privileged to be in this position. When I talk to my therapist, who I recommend everyone get, it's my first time kind of in that space, she's like, dude, are you gonna set some boundaries for yourself, right? When are you gonna say no to some things? It's just impossible to continue with this pace and this load. And I said, I will. And then Chris called and said, can you do this? And I was like, of course. But beyond that, just a little background of who I am. So my mom's on the top left corner. We're from Germantown. She worked at the Bud plant in North Philadelphia, which was an old industrial factory that made train parts. Very labor-intensive and dangerous work. She raised 6 kids. Very strong and powerful woman who really always has a place at the table for any of you, as well as people who are in her lives already. I'm one of six, but I also have a strong friendship network. Some of those pictures are my rap career, which we can't get into, some of my frat, Peace Corps times with my wife and my daughters. The bottom right, which is interesting, I told Jason that I lost my dog in August, which was really the impetus for getting a therapist, which is really crazy because my wife is so mad at me. She's like, you lost your father, you lost your grandmother, my grandmother, but the dog is what puts you in this place. And it really is. The dog is awesome. I want to be the person a dog thinks that I am. You know what I mean? Coaching soccer for a decade with the Chestnut Hill Club, and I know that some of the parents are here today of the kids I coach, and that was such an incredible experience. Right now I spend a lot of time with my nephews, and I DJ some on the side, but I really do think I have a full life, right? And with that comes a lot of responsibility. I feel like I need to give back. I grew up in a very income insecure home. And things that I took for granted were like warm meals every single day, or the lights being on, it's funny, it's like almost like a game. So when the lights were off, you called the neighborhood guys. They brought over a long ladder. They put it to the side of the house, and they connected it to the other cable there. Or when there was the water shut off, and it was in the summer, and your mom said, go down the street and fill up some buckets and bring them back. Right? So those things shaped who I am. Recognizing that I didn't have it easy, but I certainly had it so much better than so many other people. We owned our home. She sent me to Catholic school where I got a good foundation. I had a rocky high school career, being asked to leave 3 schools, where I finally graduated from Roxborough High, right up the street. Being told by the college counselor that I wasn't college material. I should really think about joining the military, right? And me using that to fuel me in an angry way, which teenagers always do. I'm gonna prove him wrong. And I was fortunate enough to attend Westchester University and kind of onward to Temple and for my grad degree, and a nonprofit career that has included some really great organizations like the People's Emergency Center and Project Home, the Red Cross, and again, Peace Corps, and now the Food Trust. So I feel like I need to live a life worthy of the calling I have received. And I have a lot to give back which leads me to kind of the work I do, right? So I understand that my life and the circumstances of it should not be the experiences, growing up anyway, that kids should have, right? And I know that lots of people have had it worse than I. And I know that there's a great imbalance in this country between haves and have-nots. So the whole notion of indivisible with liberty and justice for all. Have you seen this meme? You guys are like, why you always lying, right? It doesn't apply to everyone. So let's be real about it, right? So we know that this country was never great for most people here. We are on Lenape land, right? Which was later changed to the Delaware Indians because it was too hard for the European settlers to pronounce, right? Before they were pushed out. So just here in Philadelphia, I don't think I've met a Native American from Philadelphia. Even for the Lenapes, they've been pushed all the way out to Oklahoma, and their numbers have been reduced from 20,000 to less than 1,000, right? Looking at land as such a crucial issue and the loss of it, the amount of U.S. territories, if you looked at the map today in 2018, it's barely existing. Looking at labor, right? So stolen land and forced labor and exploitation of workers is how this country became great for so many people, right? But it was on the backs of so many others. So my point for all of this and the work that I do is that if you are not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. We all have an obligation to make this world better, not just for yourselves and your family, but for everyone. And this is not an individual issue. This is not about someone feeling guilt about their privilege and what they have. No, this is about structural and historical deficits which exist, which have created these conditions. So, map on the left is redlining. This is a 1936 FHA map, which shows that neighborhoods were literally colored red based on one factor, whether or not they had people of color living there. It didn't matter about your economic status. It didn't matter about crime or the quality of the community. None of those things. Your community had value if you didn't have people of color living there, right? The whiter your community, the better the rating was. So this had drastic implications. One, it created ghettos, right? People were not able to buy homes in those communities. People could not operate businesses in those communities because you couldn't get a loan, nor could you get insurance to operate it. And at the same time that was happening, there was an incentive for people to move to the suburbs. These are, again, federal policies which led to white flight, which led to the notion of food deserts and all kinds of other deserts which exist to this day. Particularly important for people here in this country because wealth is really built on the back of the housing industry. You get your home, you build equity, you take out a second loan and you send your kids to college, okay? You pass it down to them. They don't have to buy a home. It continues to build equity and it just continues to grow. If you were never afforded that opportunity, of course you're 20 steps behind in 2018. And the other thing is to just keep in mind that we talk about changing neighborhoods, right? And I read something today that said the only thing worse than being in a community that's being gentrified is not being in a community that's being gentrified. Okay, it means that if you are in an under-resourced community and have folks coming in, at least there is, right? Income and opportunities and more commerce, etc. But when it's done and you are displacing people and people can't afford to live, I mean, that's a question. So how do you do that responsibly? How do you take responsibility for the part you're playing in displacement and creating conditions for people's lives which are not ideal, right? So Whole Foods coming in and the work that we do to bring supermarkets to neighborhoods adds to gentrification. So we have to reconcile that and figure out how to do it in a way that brings investment dollars to communities that doesn't displace people. The other piece, right, so mortgage lending, back to this, is that we know that discrimination happens within the industry. And a lot of times it was around personal bias of a lending officer making it more difficult for people of color to get loans, higher interest rates, and more hurdles, right? So now we have online banking and the ability to apply for a mortgage online. And you know what we're finding? That the bias still exists. They're looking at conditions around your current zip code and also the schools that you attended, but all those things are tied to race. So again, we have to be aware that These things not only have happened historically, but they continue to happen. And we really have to figure out how to solve these problems. To illustrate just the impact that it has, particularly on health, we look at where supermarkets were built and operating in the city of Philadelphia, right? So the dark shaded areas is where there are high supermarket sales. And you can see it here adjusted for population. The darker it is, that's basically where you have grocery stores. As we move forward, we wanted to know what happens when you add income into this conversation. So the green area, they have high sales, meaning the supermarket's present, and you have high income. Those communities are fantastic. Not only do you have access to food, but you also have lots of other amenities. The areas of most concern are the areas in red, where there are low supermarket sales and low income. Because if you are of low income, you probably don't have a car, right? You probably have all these other barriers which really limit your ability to get to healthy foods. So you end up depending upon what's in your community, which is oftentimes corner stores selling food that's not good, and also fast food restaurants that don't offer many healthy alternatives as well. And I'm a big policy wonk, and I just know that, you know, this stuff, again, is not by accident. And even when there's been corrective action and policies that had good intentions, there still have been unintended consequences. An example of that is that Nixon, after the civil unrest back in like the 60s, created a program to incentivize black ownership of chain restaurants in communities, basically fast food restaurants. This is because, again, there was civil unrest, that communities were looking for black-owned businesses, and they looked at it as an opportunity to infuse some opportunities in communities. But what ended up happening is that those stores were transferred from white ownership to black ownership, and new stores opened in those communities, and you had the proliferation of unhealthy food now in communities. Those owners of those establishments didn't live in those communities. They gained some wealth, and they also moved out to the suburbs, right? Because they want a piece of the American dream. And the workers from those establishments have made non-livable wages since they were created, right? So again, these unintended consequences around policies. So when we adjust for population, the red area is particularly where we have lots of concerns. Poor people that don't have supermarkets. We add another layer to it and look at how diet-related disease impacts certain communities. And we see that neighborhoods that have low income, that don't have supermarkets, have higher episodes of obesity, diabetes, hypertension. We shouldn't be surprised that this is the result. So in Philly, we have lots of great things, you know, and so much of it was featured here today. But we also are the poorest big city. A third of our population lives in poverty. We have really bad health outcomes, particularly if you're a person of color. 80% more likely to even have diabetes if you're African American. I'm not going to go doom and gloom for too much longer, but you see that where you live, your situation and location in the city can make a difference of 20 years of life lived just based on your zip code. It's not genetic code, it's not lifestyle, it's nothing spectacular about you, particularly just about how you have landed in society. So that has to be fixed. And this is not unique to Philly. I think the greatest disparity I've seen maybe is in New Orleans, where there's like a 25-year difference in some communities. So I'm with the Food Trust. We are a nonprofit org. We're based here in Philly. We started out of Reading Terminal Market. The founder of the market, a man by the name of Dwayne Perry, was the manager of the market. And he would have these kind of anecdotal conversations with women and families coming from different parts of the city, doing their shopping each week at the market. And he asked really simple questions like, why are you coming all the way from North Philadelphia, from Southwest Philadelphia, catching 2 buses to be here every single week? And the answer was really simple. We don't have these things in my neighborhood. So he, along with a few volunteers, opened the first farmers market at the Tasker Homes in South Philly in partnership with the Tenants Association. And then from there, we have 24 farmers markets all over the city. We have nutrition educators working in the schools and in communities. We have a healthy corner store initiative looking to replace the junk off the shelves and help business owners understand how they can make healthier changes in their store environment. We've worked to get supermarkets built, not only here in the city and in the state, but all around the country and more. And I'm really proud of the work that the Food Trust has done. And we've seen some improvements in health related to diet, particularly in children here in the city. But where I'm at now is that it's not enough, right? No matter what we do, we have to up the ante and look at really how health is determined in our city. One, improving income. If you live in a low income area, and this is a low income city, we have to find out a way to increase employment opportunities that pay living wages. We have to look at how people who are poor don't have enough tax base to fund schools adequately. And how do we fix that? We look at working conditions in factories like what my mom had to experience, really being unhealthy. Looking at inadequate housing, looking at early childhood development, looking at social inclusion and safety nets, where how do we treat immigrants when they come in? All these things determine health at a substantial amount. That 40% are big chunks, not your genetics, not whether or not you are doing these unhealthy behaviors or not, things that may be outside of your individual control, but certainly things that we can change societally. I like policy for lots of different reasons, but one, because when you look at this CDC pyramid, you have individual actions that you can take, telling people you should eat healthy, you should exercise. That's great, and if you can do it, you can improve your health. But we know that the way to really improve health is to improve their life situations. So poverty, education, housing, inequality, those are the ways that we really are going to get healthy together. And then the policy thing. So everything from, I think there was a joke about trans fat being in the cake, right? But like, banning trans fat is a step to improve public health. The soda tax, an attempt to dissuade consumption of soda. We drink way too much soda as a society. Adding fluoride to water is a public health intervention that has so many benefits. So there's lots of things that government and society can do to promote and improve health. And just some examples of some of the things that we've been working on is like getting new water fountains put in all the schools in Philadelphia so kids can have access. Something really simple, but why don't they have that? Why is it a fight? It shouldn't be. Looking at the soda tax, right? And for the food trusts, and me personally, the mayor and the city never made this an issue about health. They talked about poverty alleviation. And for me, it was, yeah, this is going to help people drink less soda. That happens. We've seen it in tobacco. When you raise the price of it, people who are more price sensitive, particularly teens, smoke less and the rates went down. E-cigarettes, though, have changed that to a whole other degree. That's a whole other conversation. But being able to address early childhood education as a health intervention to improve their life outcomes is really key. The other thing, which is around equity, is that parks, recs, libraries are all being improved with those funds, right? And one of the sticking points was about employment and equity in employment. Council really held out to make sure that when these jobs in construction began, people of color and women were represented on those job sites, because the trade unions have historically been homogeneous, just white men. And no matter what has happened over the years, lots of promises around apprenticeship programs and things that they would do to make it more inclusive, and it's never happened. And this is an attempt to not only improve health, improve our city infrastructure, but also advance equity in employment around racial and gender lines. Those are the multiple opportunities that we all should be seeking to make a difference. And we can just go on about more of that stuff. But health isn't everything, and we should be looking for opportunities to advance policies that have multiple wins. So simple things like fair wages. There's a fight for 15 happening in the city. And why you need to support it is because it's important. When people are made whole, everyone wins. And for a health perspective, people who make better wages smoke less, they have less stress, they're able to fund themselves in adequate housing and all these other benefits. This other notion around, there's a program to bring more black teachers into the classroom, men particularly. And I have a question. This is a bit of a quiz for folks here. Think about your entire educational career, right? From kindergarten, preschool, kindergarten, elementary school, middle school, junior high, high school, college, advanced degrees, right? Think about the number of black teachers that you've had, right? And I'm thinking this is probably for this group, maybe 30 teachers plus that you've had in your lives. Is there anyone here who's had 20 teachers that are of color? 15? 10? Maybe 10? Okay, that's good. How about 5? Okay, a few 5. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Right. So I know Hillary talked about implicit bias or bias earlier. And if you look at how we shape our development and respect for authority figures, it starts early on with how we think about our teachers and how endearing they are, right? And if you've never had a person of color in that position, can you think that it has subconsciously shaped maybe how you feel about people and people of color, right? You never have an opportunity to see them as an authority figure, as someone of value and worth. And again, this is not an indictment of anyone, but it's just being aware that we've had these things placed upon us and that we have to be really intentional about correcting our defaults, which are not necessarily our own fault. Again, the natural gas plant, and I'm very opinionated. So I know SEPTA is looking to move a natural gas refinery right at Wayne Junction where the asthma rates are through the roof. They would never think about moving it to Chestnut Hill or Society Hill. It would never be a consideration. I don't care what you say about the infrastructure and the way the trains are designed. You just wouldn't do it. So why do poor communities of color always get put upon, particularly when they have the most need? And again, can go on and on. So much of my work is around advancing equity and health equity. And I just have this illustration to illustrate. So, we all want equality and we think it's fair. But an equitable perspective is that you give people what they need to be whole. And sometimes it means that they get more. Doesn't mean that you get less, but they get more because they need it, right? So think about that and apply it to so many other parts of your lives. Some examples of actions and policies which have larger benefits, I think in the bottom right, that's a simple curb cutout, right? ADA mandated that for people with disabilities in wheelchairs. How many of you, particularly moms in here, have used those to take your baby in a stroller right down the street? So that was a targeted policy to support people who needed it the most that had universal benefit to everyone. We all can win. We just have to think about it in those terms. Looking at labor, we talked a little bit about the building trade and Black Lives Matter in every aspect of life, and including labor. And how do we make sure that we are resourcing people in the ways that they need? A couple of other things to illustrate is the sister Aisha here is in Baton Rouge, and that's the kind of iconic Black Lives Matter photograph, right? And we show up for so many other things and so many other people. But when a person of color says that this is a problem, like, well, what were they doing, right? How many barbecue Beckys do we have to experience to understand that this is real and a problem? And we have to think about how we can show up for other people particularly those who need it the most. The interesting thing about Ferguson and Baltimore, particularly Baltimore, is when people saw that there was unrest happening in communities and the Rite Aid was on fire, and there were questions like, how could they burn down the only store they have in that community? One, that's a problem, that it's the only store in that community, right? And that, particularly for a grocery store, they hadn't had a grocery store in that community for 50 years. That was the store that was burned down when King was assassinated in '68, right? So again, these are issues, and all of a sudden, like you think about like the murder of Freddie Gray, but all these other underlining issues compound that as well. The other thing is the flag, right? So the pride flag has been a symbol that has meant like equity and equality and support for the LGBTQ community, right? When black and brown people were talking about the challenges that they were facing in the neighborhood and being discriminated against, and the city's office, one brought suit against folks, which was awesome, but also, just a symbolic act of adding the black and brown stripe to the flag to show solidarity, and folks lost their minds. Like, how could you do that to the flag, right? So how is it that you can show up for others who are oppressed, but when you bring race into the conversation, it becomes a problem, right? And we have to really ask ourselves that. And in the whole point of a threat, injustice, a threat anywhere is a threat everywhere to justice. So those are my daughters, Zola and Maya, and they're my heart. Is Morgan Plant still here? He's somewhere around here. Can you send a picture of me to my daughter? Thank you, right? Right, she has no idea what I do. All I know is I got a text message that said they couldn't come because of the weather, and then 20 minutes later, can you take me dress shopping tonight? So, I don't know what's going on. So, but we are made wise not by the recollection of our past, but by the responsibility for our future. So I just want to read something that stood out. And tell me if this rings true. So pervasive discrimination and segregation in employment, education, and housing, which resulted in communities of color being excluded from the benefits of economic progress. Lack of investment, creating deteriorating facilities and unmet human needs, especially focused in areas of growing concentrations of impoverished black communities. Crippling poverty, impacting the younger generation and enforcing failure. Police brutality in the form of harassment and physical and verbal abuse. The frustration of powerlessness and alienation felt by these communities. Does that sound familiar to what's happening today, right? That's from the Kerner Commission 50 years ago. And we're still dealing with the same issues. I hope someone's not up here 50 years from now talking about these same damn things, right? Like, we are all empowered to make a difference in the world. We just have to want that and work towards it. It is work. It's heavy, heavy work. But we are all called to do great things. Come on. Thank you.